my stage, but this is actually Martina's stage.
It's ours.
It's ours, and the robots. So I'm here with Martina Mara. That's my beard, right?
That's your topic.
That's probably you.
Is it me?
Microphone problems is my favorite problem, actually. No, it's you. We do it like this. That's better. So microphone problems are just followed by clicker problems, which are followed by by presentations not working. So great that you're here, guys. I'm here with Martina Mara, Professor Martina Mara, and she's an Austrian tech psychologist and an expert on human-robot relations. Martina worked for institutions such as Ars Electronica, Future Lab, the Institute of Design Research Vienna, and you became the first international professor on robopsychology at Johannes Kepler University in Linz last year. And your research is mostly about public and human attitudes towards robotics and AI. You're also a member of the Austrian Council of Robotics, so I think you're the perfect partner to speak about what we're going to talk about today, which is the increasingly difficult relationship between humans and robots. Hello, Martina.
Hello, thanks for having me. And thanks for this nice introduction.
Martina, when we hear the word robot, or when you ask people on the street which images come into your mind when you hear the word robot, it's mostly Arnold Schwarzenegger, I guess, from Terminator, and other sci-fi created images of robots. Why is it that sci-fi is having such a big influence on the image of robots today?
Well, it really is like that. I mean, let me start with a short anecdote. Recently I had a chat with one of my new colleagues at the University of Linz, a professor in social science, and I told him about how I used to work with car industry, German car industry, by the way, on mutual understanding between self-driving cars and pedestrians and what it takes for people to feel safe in a shared space with autonomous vehicles. And he went like, huh? Aren't you a robopsychologist? I thought you would work with robots, and I was like, yes, of course, sure, I do, I am. And I understood that, of course, as with the majority of people, also his image of the robot was kind of the mechanical copy of a human being. So I think that, of course, science fiction has an influence here and plays a huge role. But knowing from tons of media psychological studies that, of course, in shaping our attitudes towards technologies, it doesn't really matter whether a story that is told is fictional or non-fictional. I hesitate blaming sci-fi writers for not telling the truth about the actual status quo of AI or robotics, because that's not their job description, right? So I'm more worried about that the sci-fi image that we know is also mediated by non-fictional media and sometimes even by industry itself.
So the evil ones aren't the sci-fi writers, but magazines and scientists themselves? Is that what you're saying?
Well, not the evil ones. I mean, I understand the strategy because, you know, we live in an economy of attention. So we have to fight for user engagement, and we know from many empirical studies that you get more user engagement with highly emotional content, and especially with negatively connotated emotional content. So I think the Terminator is a classical image here. I understand the logic behind that. I would rather say that the really funny thing is that even representatives of industry and of, you know, the tech community sometimes try to fuel public misconceptions in order to maybe make a fortune out of that, you know? I mean, I'm thinking of our famous show robot Sophia, for example, you know? Android robots touring around the globe, being presented on the cover of DL magazine. And listen to the developers of Sophia. I mean, they talk about her like she was a living being, and let her talk about her values and her feelings and about her wish to create a family on her own and things like that.
Yeah, and Sophia also became like a citizen of I think Saudi Arabia or something like that.
Which is nothing as a marketing gag, you know, it's really bullshit.
And Sophia, actually, I've met Sophia quite a few times, and she's the dumbest piece of trash that is around.
Of course, I mean, you know, there's one original Sophia which is maybe quite interesting, and I mean, it's a cool device. You can recreate 62 facial expressions of us humans, and it has a more or less okay-ish chatbot function. But I mean, they recreated Sophia's to have her touring around the world and to make money out of that. So actually it's more or less a puppet, and all the dialogues that you see on the stages, and if you see her being interviewed on TV, it's all scripted. You have to send the questions you want to ask Sophia like 1 month before the actual show, so yeah, it's really scripted.
Yeah, and if she doesn't have an internet connection, she can't respond. So there's this Joseph Weizenbaum. He played with a bot engine answering questions many years ago. I think it was in the 60s, early 60s, and that engine was called Eliza.
Yes.
And Eliza worked with keywords, a bit like Sophia today.
Yeah.
So if you chatted with Eliza and you said something, my father isn't feeling well this week, then Eliza would respond, oh, tell me more about your family, because she recognized father, right? And if you said, misunderstanding is the father of war, yeah, then she would respond, oh, tell me more about your family, because you had the word father in it. And Sophia's a bit the same when she lost connection to the web, right?
Yeah, of course, it's a bit the same. I mean, it follows the same logic. It's a bit more complex, and they have more data in the data bank behind the system. But yeah, basically it's the same.
But actually, we shouldn't spend too much time on Sophia. So there is.
I mean, just to make it clear, it's not an emotional being. Probably here everybody.
Is any Sophia developer here? Good, none.
David Hansen? No.
No.
In the house.
Okay, good. So there is this image, yeah, and whoever created it, we have this image, and this image is responsible for people acting negatively towards robotics and AI on the street, because one of the first questions always is, when will they take over the world? Yeah, and that it clearly comes from that negative image. So what can we do to correct that image? We meaning scientists, politicians.
Yeah, I really think we have to create other visions, you know, alternative, positive visions of a complementary future of humans and robots that are still interesting. Because, as I said, I mean, I understand why the media uses these images. But as a psychologist, I also know what they do, because we build our impressions on a given image extremely quickly. It only takes 40 milliseconds, and we come up with an idea of what this means.
It's a blink of an eye.
Not even, and you know, many people don't read the text. So, okay, I understand why media uses these emotional images. So we have to create alternative images, alternative visions that are still somehow interesting to tell. I often try to show images of, let's say, exoskeletons, for example, or robots as tools, or making clear that transportation robots or autonomous vehicles are also robots, and we have to get away from these humanoid and android images. Yeah.
So at the South by Southwest Fair, there is a booth, I think, in the Japanese collective stand, where they have lobots, and lobots are little puppets. And the claim says lovers only exist to be loved by you. And so you cuddle them and you caress them, and then they blink with their eyes and they make little noises like a bit like the seals, like the baby seals. Is that a positive image that can be used to correct it?
Yeah, of course, it's probably a positive image, but I don't know if it's the right one, because these kind of, social and emotional robots are probably not the most important robots within the next decade. So I think we really should talk about, I don't know if they make the life of really a huge amount of people better or worse. Many people are afraid of social isolation issues coming with these types of robots. So maybe interesting, also from a psychological point of view, it's really easy to make a robot appear to be cute. So we can't help to fall for a baby scheme designed robot with big eyes and a friendly laugh. So that's not very complex, but I think it's a funny thing. It may be an interactive toy, but what we really should talk about is how to make our lives better, how to create synergy, robot-human synergy in a good way, to establish more well-being, to fight, to use AI for climate change and things like that. So I don't know if Paro or any other cuddle robots are really the solution towards these topics.
So we need to dehumanize them. We need
maybe, yeah.
So your title, Robopsychologist, you're not the first person having that title. There's actually a fictional person having it, and it's Susan Calvin from Isaac Asimov. And Susan Calvin says in one of the novels, she was asked, why are robots, or how are robots different from humans? And she says, they are way different, because they are decent. The robots, she means, not the humans. So, as a robopsychologist, if you look into the future, who's going to need more psychological counseling? Is it machines or humans? When it comes to the interaction of both of them?
Of course, I hope none of them. Definitely not the robots, because they don't have anything like a psyche or something. And hopefully also not the users, because that's our goal, to establish or to create human-machine interfaces and robots that are so intuitively understandable and usable that you don't need any consultation or treatment to use them. So that's really the goal, so I hope none.
Okay, so since you already mentioned the interaction and the user interface, can you give us a few examples of how psychology actually helps to design these interactions?
Of course. I think one of the aspects that's brought in by psychology is the differential aspect, that users are different from each other, depending on many factors, such as social demographic factors, age, gender, but also the level of expertise they have, for example, and also personality factors. And I think here we still see huge potential to adjust behavioral components of robots to individual needs. For example, let's say how proactive or passive they communicate or act in a situation of human-robot collaboration. There was a funny study conducted by Austrian roboticists over the last few years, where they tried to train a robot to assemble an IKEA chair as efficient as possible together with human test persons. And they implemented a machine learning algorithm to train it on efficiency so that the robot would learn which part of the IKEA chair when to hand over to the person. And it got faster and faster with handing over the right part. And the colleagues, the roboticists, found out that approximately a third of people being confronted with the very efficient final version of this robot, they found it totally uncomfortable because they felt dominated by this type of robot. They said, oh my God, it's controlling me, it's overruling me, it's too fast for me, I don't want that. To wait for my command. And whereas 2/3 found it okay to interact with these type of robots. So I think this is a good example of how we could still adjust robot behavior, for example, in how active or passively it acts towards a human to personal needs.
It reminds me a bit of my father asking me for the Imbusschlüssel when I was a little child, and I didn't know what the Imbusschlüssel was, and I felt quite bad at that point as well. So since there are more robots, more machines around us that are increasingly acting autonomously, yeah. Right? How can we make sure that a robot always introduces themselves as a machine, as a robot? Is that something that's important? For example, if you talk to a robot on the telephone, yeah, booking a flight, is it important that the machine says, "Hi, I'm the Lufthansa chatbot, and you can talk with me," or doesn't that matter at all?
Yeah, well, I mean that's currently very much discussed, also based on the example of the recently presented Google Duplex voice assistant.
The haircutting scene. Right?
Exactly, the one that we don't really know whether it works that way already or not, but the one that would call the hairdresser for you or reserve a table at a restaurant for you with an extremely human-like, realistic voice, with ahs and ums and adjusting to regional dialects to make the bot appear as realistic as possible. Probably many of you have seen the videos on YouTube. For these types, I mean, if we talk about self-driving cars and other embodied robots, I mean, they disclose themselves kind of. But in these bot examples, I think I'm on the side of, yes, we need transparency, really. I mean, Google said that they're gonna build in this disclosure in the beginning of the talks. But then I asked myself, I mean, does it really make sense that it still sounds this realistically human-like? Because, I mean, you get this phone call and, the bot says, "Hi, I'm the bot calling for Holger Volland," and then still uses these ahs and ums, and I think, this feels kind of strange. So maybe that's a way to go back to even more synthetic voices, to adjust it to the right level here. I think it's really important also from the psychological point of view that we know whom we talk to, because talking to an intelligent bot is kind of like talking to a mentalist, all the time. Having some kind of superpowers, recording what you said, always thinking of what's your current aggression level based on your non-verbal behavior.
I'm not aggressive.
You have a very low rate, like on a scale ranging from 1 to 10. It's probably 1. So all this data gets recorded, and I want to have the chance to decide for myself how I want to talk to this kind of interaction partner. Yeah, and we know that people talk differently and disclose information about themselves differently towards machines or humans.
Yeah, that was probably the most shocking thing that I've read or experienced when I wrote my book. It was the story of Liesl Yearsley. She ran a company programming chatbots.
Yeah.
And she said at one point they had to stop it because humans were telling the chatbots so many secrets even when the chatbots didn't ask for them. So you were chatting with a bot that was from your insurance company or whatever, and humans started telling these bots about their illnesses, their anxiety, their feelings, whatever. And you mentioned it, we people as humans, we don't realize that that this is not a conversation like the one we are having, where probably 90% of what I tell you will be away in 10 minutes, right? It's a conversation that is stored, yeah? It's on hard disks. And do we have to train humans how to interact with machines?
Really, I'm more on the side of we have to design our machines a way that we don't need to train humans. By building in these disclosures, by using more or less human-like voices, for example, for these kinds of chatbots. I mean, just to bring up another example, sometimes this effect that humans disclose more information towards a machine can also have a positive impact. There are recent studies on how US war veterans talking to a chatbot in therapy settings and dared to disclose about very traumatic experience during war. They never could talk about towards a human being because they felt too ashamed. So sometimes we can see chances and opportunities in these kinds of effects. Yeah.
Okay. Then there are robots that are designed in a way that we interact with them as we do with humans. I'm talking, for example, well, we already mentioned the baby seal robot, but the industry of sex robots, I learned, is also growing. So these are robots used for, well, let's call it lovemaking, and
it's really not lovemaking. Let's call it intercourse.
Let's call it intercourse. Okay. So these machines, they do a great job if they act like humans, right? So
yeah, and you can put the private areas into the washing machine, so that's really practical.
Did you do research on sex robots as well?
Well, yeah, I did one study together with colleagues from the University of Würzburg where we looked into what kind of personalities would be actually open for engaging with a sex robot or would have, higher buying intentions, for example. And I mean, what we found out is kind of cliche, I'm sorry. It's really like young and shy male persons are more open towards sex robots. The shyness factor plays really a huge role here, and interestingly, shy women are not more interested in sex robots than extroverted ones. So this is really also a gender effect. But maybe that's also due to how sex robots are presented, We don't know that many male sex robots by now, yeah.
What do you think? Why are men and women acting differently here?
I think we are going into the discussion or into discussing traditional gender stereotypes here probably. I mean, there's a whole discourse going on in social sciences and philosophy on potential impacts and risks of sex robots and how they could re-establish objectification of the woman, female body, and re-establish traditional gender stereotypes. Because of course, the sex robots, or let's call them puppets, because they are not very autonomous yet. They are usually very stereotypical female passive figures. So yeah, this is definitely a point here. We have to come up with other alternative sex robots, or really talk about.
But you already touched the moral issue here. I learned that there are two schools when it comes to how to use machines, for example, to treat sexual mental disorders. So one school says you can use machines and give them to patients who have several disorders or some disorders in order to let them live out their wishes that could be illegal in real society or in real situations. And then there's another school saying, oh no, don't do that, because it encourages them. And if they are, for example, pedophile, and they do it with a robot, they might act like that in real life as well. What are your feelings about that?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, because we would need long-term studies on that, but it's not really a realm that you can study that easily. I think it's appropriate to assume that human-robot interaction could establish models, and these models are then used also for, interpersonal relations and communication. So, I mean, sex robots are a very extreme example, but I mean, if we think of a less extreme example, let's say Alexa. There was this discussion whether children should learn to say please towards Alexa when commanding it to do something. So I think it's the same discussion, whether it's possible that we learn models and schemes that are then reproduced in interpersonal interaction by these machines, and we don't know yet, but I think it's really a critical point, and we would need these long-term studies.
But it's a bit borderline, right? Because on the one hand, we have to make sure that machines aren't acting human-like. As you said, exactly. We need to create them more machine-like. On the other hand, we know that we as humans, we like to interact with things that are human-like more than we do when they're not, right? So it's a small line.
It is, totally. But also, it doesn't take a lot to fuel our anthropomorphism. We don't need high human-like realism to want to interact with something.
What's the name of your cleaning robot?
I don't have one, because I think they are not as good as they should be. I'm still waiting for the very good window cleaner. Yeah. But I have many friends and family members who, of course, came up with all kinds of creative nicknames for their Roombas and iRobots, and it's a very good example of anthropomorphism. A Roomba is not humanoid, not android at all, but just this kind of apparently autonomous motion already is a very strong social cue, and we are already starting to infer and see human likeness in this machine, to see intentions, to see emotions. So it doesn't take much to fuel this.
Yeah, so all of my friends who have Roombas, they all gave them names. So how are your Roombas called? Tell us. Who has a Roomba? What's the name of it? Roomby. How long did it take you to... Roomby.
Nice.
More Roombas in the house? No? I doubt that. But
I read a study on how people name Roombas, and I think the wildest one was Rambo. Seems to be a common name for Roombas, Rambo.
Yeah, they can be quite clumsy.
Yeah, this is the thing. I'm really waiting for the non-clumsy ones.
So the last question I wanted to, or the last set of few questions I wanted to ask you is, let's talk about China, the US, and Germany, but do it differently than we've heard before. We know that AI and robot development in these countries are different, and we discuss it a lot, whether how the political implications are, and so on. I wanted to ask you, do you think there are cultural differences that actually made us go into different directions? Is there like a cultural difference that made us Germans and Austrians maybe as well be slower in the development of robotics than, let's say, China and the US?
Yeah, I think there are some public assumptions, you know. I mean, I spent some time in Japan collaborating with companies and universities there, and I mean, there's always this assumption, this is something I get asked about very often. So why are the Japanese so different from us? Why are they such robot lovers? And actually, funny thing is that there's no empirical evidence for that. So all the studies, the intercultural studies that we have, show that it's actually we are quite the same. Aside from that, talk about personal experience or things that are discussed in Trion sometimes. Of course, I mean, if you look into the cultural or religious backgrounds, you could say that, for example, in Asia, animism and Shinto and philosophies like that, through this, people are very used to the image of the object having a spirit or being animate, something like that. So they are not as skeptical as Europeans or people from the US towards this idea. But yeah, I mean, my personal experience also goes in this direction. I know many Japanese people are really open towards the ghost in the shell, to say. But yeah, the empirical studies don't show this difference.
Okay.
Actually.
Thank you very much, Martina. We have time for a few questions. This might be the first and also the last time during South by Southwest you have the chance to talk to a robopsychologist. Use it wisely and ask a very kluge question.
We're talking about media and how we are covering all these things regarding robots, and that maybe this should be done differently. So, what's your idea? What should be our approach?
I think we all should contribute to the demystification of artificial intelligence and robotics right now. So showing different images, but also explaining what the status quo actually is, what emotional robots actually are, what cognitive robots are, what machine learning, deep learning, neural nets are, because the people out there actually have no idea. And yeah, we fear the unknown, you know. If we don't know that much about a certain topic, we have to rely on what we hear about it, we have to rely on stories that are told to us. So I really think we have to educate, is maybe we have to empower, this is a buzzword, I know we have to empower more people with a bit more knowledge and give them the possibility to take part in the discourse on how we want to shape the future with technology. And we have to explain to them what machine learning is, that it's not your magical creature, but it's actually very advanced statistics, and that we don't have to fear the Terminator, but we really have to discuss about the reproduction of stereotypes through data-driven AI. Yeah, I think it's really important. I really like one study, one survey actually, that was conducted by the Bertelsmann Stiftung in Germany last year. Was called, in English, gonna translate it, what Germans know and think about algorithms. Probably some of you know it. And it was really interesting because one result was that 50% of the population have actually no idea what the term algorithm means. 50%. 50%. They couldn't even name a second term related to the term algorithm. So that's reality, and we have to deal with that and explain a bit more what all these magical terms and images really mean, what the status quo is.
This is great, thank you. Just to that point, is there a particular Because when you talk about terms that people have trouble understanding, you think about in the abstract, it can be difficult.
I was saying when you think about certain terms that maybe might be difficult or abstract for let's call the general public to understand. Is there a particular industry or even a case study where people can look at this and say, oh, okay, that's what AI is, and that is this is how I can interact with it. Aside, maybe it is a Roomba, maybe it is talking about automated cars, but I think people are vastly uncomfortable with that. Is there anything that comes to mind immediately?
When I'm trying to explain the current, hyped AI, which is the data-driven AI, I often use the Google Translate as an example because it's something that many people use on a daily basis, and it's also a good example to explain about the bias that could be in data and how it's reproduced, because there are some really interesting examples of how Google Translate reproduces gender bias through its translation. So I try to use really day-to-day applications to talk about it. And maybe another good example of how to do it is in Finland. They created an online course called Elements of AI that gives the basic introduction into AI to everyone. Everyone can go to this website, can do the course, and also students from all kinds of disciplines can do it, and they even get ECTS credits for that. So, but it's created in a way that it's understandable for really everybody. I think that's a very good example.
It is a very good example. So I have one last question to you guys, the audience. Tell me, who of you could imagine falling in love with a machine within the next 10 years? Hands up. Who could fall in love with a machine?
Motorcycles.
Motorcycles, okay. I mean, really no one? Well, let's have this panel again next year and then the years to come, and in 10 years we'll see who's in love with a machine.
I don't give an answer to the last question because my husband is in the audience.
Thank you very much, Martina.
Thank you.